Good evening and welcome to the Job Search Solution, the radio program where we talk about looking for a job, changing jobs, changing careers, hiring. And as always, we begin with a prayer. Dear God, grant us thy peace and thy mercy, thy will be done. Rich Levinsky is away this weekend. He had a death in the family. We're going to be talking about consulting in the next two portions of the program. But right now, we want to continue what we do every time we do this, and we want to begin with 10 seconds of being grateful. So think of 3 things today that made you grateful. Go. You just can't be unhappy when you're grateful. That's good. All right. So what I wanted to talk about this evening was something that's really important in the interviewing process if you're a candidate, and if you're an employer too, but if you're a candidate especially. And that's as what prompted this was the unfortunate and gruesome death of Charlie Kirk. There isn't one of us that isn't moved by that whole situation, and well, it doesn't do any good to go into how awful that whole thing was and how it impacts our society and what it says about our society and the world we live in and everything like that. But what it brought to mind to me was something that you need to be careful of if you're a candidate and you're interviewing. And if you're an employer too, but especially if you're a candidate. Whatever you do, don't get roped into talking about it with an employer or frankly, any kind of interviewing situation. If the subject comes up, you may want to voice your opinion by saying, that was a real tragedy, and hopefully our society can recover. And then drop it. Don't get baited into discussing it further. Don't give your opinion of it and drag it on, because you never know how a prospective employer, well, you'll find out how they feel about it. And most people with any common sense, it was a repugnant thing and it was a god awful thing. But you never know how people feel about things like that. And the last thing you want to do is run the risk of being eliminated from consideration in a job because of a political or social comment that you made in an interview that has nothing to do with the job. You've got to be very careful of things like that. I had a candidate one time who was going through a terrible divorce, and she voiced that she was going through a terrible divorce and how awful it was to me. And I told her to be sure to not talk about it in the interview, any interviews that she had. Well, it was on the top of her mind, and she did. And sure enough, when I told her, what'd you do that for? She said, oh, it was fine. The employer had gone through a terrible divorce and she was very empathetic to the plight that I had and all of that. The employer turned around and said she wasn't interested in hiring the candidate because she too had gone through a terrible divorce and she wouldn't want to hire anybody that was going through that much of an emotional difficulty. So you never know how things like that are going to be accepted or understood by a prospective employer. So the lesson is Don't talk about things social like that. Give, certainly if you're cornered and asked an opinion, give one, especially something like what happened there was surely a terrible social um, uh, matter, and it was awful, but don't go beyond that. You're there to talk about your qualifications, your ability to get the job and ability to do a job, not your uh, uh, political or social um, feelings about what happened or what didn't happen or what the government should do or shouldn't do or anything like that. You go down that rabbit hole, and first of all, it takes up too much time. The hiring authority will realize that you never really talked about the job and your ability to do the job. And it was not a good idea. So just don't do that. It just doesn't make any sense. It's going to lead nowhere. And answer the question simply and don't get distracted by it. Because if you do, it's going to mess up the whole thing and it can't help you. And the longer you go on about the social situation and the longer you comment about it, the worse it's going to get. So just stay away from stuff like that. Stay away from politics, stay away from anything social, just stay away from it because it isn't going to help you. And the more you realize that you got to talk about the job, your qualifications, and your ability to do the job, the better off you're going to be. All right. This is Tony Bashir with the Job Search Solution.